The shrill ring of my phone pierced through the quiet of my home office, startling me from my concentration. I glanced at the caller ID and felt my stomach tighten. Rachel, my mother-in-law. I took a deep breath plastered on a smile she couldn't see and answered. Hello, Rachel. How are you? Dana, dear, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Her voice dripped with false sweetness, a tone I'd grown all too familiar with over the years. Not at all, I lied, eyeing the stack of event plans on my desk. What can I do for you? Well, I've been thinking about your new house plans, the one you and Mark are looking at. I frowned, confused. We hadn't told anyone about our house hunting yet, not even my own parents. How did you know about that? Oh, Mark mentioned it the other day when he stopped by. Such a thoughtful boy, always keeping his mother in the loop. I bit back a retort. Of course, he had. Right. Well, we're still in the early stages. That's perfect, Rachel cut in, her voice rising with excitement. I have a wonderful idea. Why don't I move in with you two? The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I'm sorry, what? It makes perfect sense, dear. You know I've been feeling a bit lonely in this big old house since Harold passed. And with you two starting a family soon, you are planning on children, aren't you? You'll need someone to help out. My mind raced, trying to process her words. Rachel, I don't think. Now don't worry about the finances, she steamrolled on. I know you've been saving up for years. We can use that money to get a bigger place, something with a nice in-law suite for me. It'll be perfect. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. Rachel, this is a lot to take in. Mark and I need to discuss this. Oh, of course, dear, but Mark's already on board. He thinks it's a wonderful idea. My heart sank. Of course he did. I see. Well, I really need to get back to work. Can we talk about this later? Certainly, dear. I'll let you go. Just think about how lovely it'll be, all of us under one roof. Ta-ta. The line went dead, and I sat there, stunned. My mind whirled with questions and emotions. How could Mark agree to this without talking to me first? And how dare Rachel assume she could just insert herself into our lives like this? I stood up, pacing the room, trying to calm my racing thoughts. The front door opened and I heard Mark's familiar footsteps. Dana, you home? I strode out of the office, my face set. Mark, we need to talk. He looked up, surprised by my tone. What's wrong? I just got off the phone with your mother, I said, watching his face carefully. She seems to think she's moving in with us. Mark's expression flickered. Was that guilt? Before settling into a neutral mask. Oh, that. Yeah, she mentioned something about it the other day. And you didn't think to discuss it with me? I could hear the edge in my voice, sharp enough to cut. He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. I figured we'd talk about it when the time came. It's not like we've even found a house yet. That's not the point, Mark. This is our life, our future. We're supposed to make these decisions together. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, can we talk about this later? I've had a long day at work, and... No, I cut him off, my patience wearing thin. We need to talk about this now. Your mother seems to think it's a done deal, and she's already planning on using my savings for it. His eyes widened slightly at that, and I saw a flicker of something, panic, cross his face. Dana, it's not like that. We can figure this out. But as I stood there, looking at my husband's evasive expression, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on here than met the eye. Something wasn't right, and I was determined to find out what it was. I sat at our kitchen table, staring at the stack of house listings Mark had brought home. The weight of Rachel's proposition hung heavy in the air between us. Dana, honey, I really think we should consider this, Mark said, his voice soft but insistent. Mom's not getting any younger, and she could use our support. I looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt. Mark, this is our life we're talking about, our future. Don't you think it's a bit... much? He sighed, reaching across the table to take my hand. I know it's not ideal, but think of the benefits. We could afford a bigger place, and Mom could help out when we start having kids. The mention of children made my stomach clench. We'd been trying for months with no luck, a fact I hadn't shared with Rachel. And what about our privacy, our independence? We'll set boundaries, Mark assured me, but his eyes didn't quite meet mine. It'll be fine, you'll see. I pulled my hand away, frustration building. And what about my savings? Rachel seems to think she has a claim on them. Mark's expression tightened. Well, we are family, and you've always said you wanted to invest in our future. Our future, Mark, not your mother's retirement plan. The doorbell rang, interrupting our tense conversation. Mark jumped up to answer it, relief evident on his face. I heard Rachel's voice floating in from the hallway, and my heart sank. Of course she'd show up now. Dana, darling. Rachel swept into the kitchen, all smiles and floral perfume. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. I forced a smile. Not at all, Rachel. We were just discussing house plans. Oh, wonderful. She clapped her hands together. I've been thinking about that. I have some ideas for the layout of my suite. I felt my smile falter. Your suite? Well, of course, dear. We'll need to make sure I have my own space. Nothing too extravagant, mind you. Just a bedroom, sitting area, and perhaps a small kitchenette. I glanced at Mark, hoping for support, but he was suddenly very interested in the fruit bowl on the counter. Rachel, we haven't actually decided. Nonsense. She waved her hand dismissively. Mark and I have been discussing this for weeks. It's practically settled. The room seemed to tilt. Weeks? I looked at Mark, who had the decency to look uncomfortable. Is that true? Before he could answer, Rachel plowed on. Now about the finances. I've been looking at your savings account, Dana, and I think if we combine that with what I can contribute, we should be able to afford a lovely place. My head snapped up. How do you know about my savings account? Rachel blinked, a moment of uncertainty crossing her face before she recovered. Oh, Mark mentioned it, of course. We've been going over the numbers, trying to make this work for everyone. I felt like I couldn't breathe. The betrayal of my privacy, the casual way they'd been planning my future without me. It was too much. I need some air, I muttered, pushing back from the table. Dana, wait. Mark called after me, but I was already out the door. I walked aimlessly down our street, trying to make sense of what was happening. How had I lost control of my life so quickly? And why did it feel like Mark and Rachel were conspiring against me? My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Sarah. Hey girl, everything okay? You've been MIA lately. I stared at the message, tears pricking my eyes. In that moment, I made a decision. I couldn't face going back to that house, to Mark and Rachel's united front. I needed a friend, someone on my side. I typed back quickly, Not really. Can I come over? I need to talk. As I waited for her reply, I glanced back at my house. Through the kitchen window, I could see Mark and Rachel, heads bent close together in conversation. The sight made my stomach churn. Whatever was going on, I was determined to get to the bottom of it. But first, I needed to regroup, to find my footing again, and maybe, just maybe, figure out how to take back control of my life. The weeks following our reluctant agreement to Rachel's proposition were a blur of house hunting and tense conversations. I threw myself into work, desperate for a distraction from the growing unease in my gut. But even as I planned elaborate weddings and corporate galas, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong in my own life. It started with little things. Hushed phone calls that abruptly ended when I entered the room. Scraps of paper with unfamiliar numbers hastily shoved into pockets. Mark's increasingly frequent late nights at the office. One evening, as I was tidying up our home office, I stumbled upon a receipt for a high-end restaurant downtown. The date was from last Tuesday, a night Mark had claimed he was working late. My hands shook as I stared at the paper, the implications hitting me like a punch to the gut. I heard the front door open and quickly shoved the receipt into my pocket. Mark's footsteps echoed through the house. Dana? You home? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. In the office, I called back, trying to keep my voice neutral. Mark appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened and hair slightly disheveled. Hey, honey, how was your day? I forced a smile. Fine. Busy with the Johnson wedding. How about you? Another late night? A flicker of something, guilt, crossed his face before he nodded. Yeah, this new project is really demanding, but it'll be worth it in the end. I bit my tongue, the receipt burning a hole in my pocket. Part of me wanted to confront him right then and there, but another part, the part that still clung to hope, held me back. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. Oh, by the way, Mark continued, oblivious to my inner turmoil, Mom called earlier. She wants us to come over for dinner tomorrow night. Says she has some ideas about the new house she wants to discuss. I felt my jaw clench. Of course she does. Mark frowned. Dana, I thought we were past this. We agreed. No, Mark, I cut him off, my frustration finally boiling over. You agreed. You and your mother decided everything without me, and I just got dragged along for the ride. He took a step back, surprise and irritation warring on his face. That's not fair. We're trying to do what's best for everyone. Are you? I challenged, pulling the receipt from my pocket. Is that what this is about, too? Mark's face paled as he recognized the paper. Where did you get that? Does it matter? I waved the receipt in front of him. What matters is that you lied to me. Again. He reached for the receipt, but I pulled it away. Dana, it's not what you think. Then what is it, Mark? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're hiding a lot more than just dinner plans. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and I saw panic flash in his eyes. You should get that, I said coldly. Wouldn't want to keep your dinner date waiting. Mark's face hardened. You're being ridiculous. I'm not going to stand here and defend myself against your paranoid accusations. He turned and stormed out of the office, leaving me standing there, the receipt crumpled in my fist. I heard him grab his keys and slam the front door behind him. In the sudden silence, I felt something inside me break. The last shreds of trust I had been clinging to disintegrated, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. I pulled out my phone and dialed Sarah's number. She answered on the second ring. Dana, what's wrong? I took a deep breath. I need your help. I think Mark's having an affair. There was a moment of stunned silence before Sarah's voice came back, filled with concern and determination. I'm on my way. We'll figure this out together. As I hung up, I looked around the office, at the life Mark and I had built together, at the future we had planned. It all felt like a lie now. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to be anyone's fool anymore. Whatever was going on, I was going to get to the bottom of it. And heaven help Mark if my suspicions were right. I stood in the empty living room of our soon-to-be new home, surrounded by paint swatches and fabric samples. The excitement I should have felt was overshadowed by a gnawing anxiety that had become my constant companion. What do you think about this color for the walls? I asked, turning to show Mark the soft sage green I'd been considering. He glanced up from his phone, barely registering the swatch. Whatever you think is best, honey. I bit back a sigh. This is supposed to be our home, Mark. Don't you want to have a say in how it looks? He shrugged, already looking back at his screen. I trust your judgment. You're the one with the eye for design. I turned away, fighting back tears of frustration. This house, which should have been a symbol of our future together, felt more like a prison with each passing day. Mark's indifference was just another bar on the cage. As I moved to the kitchen to lay out some tile samples, I heard Mark's phone buzz. He answered it quickly, his voice low and urgent. Now? I don't know if I can. Okay, I'll be there in 20 minutes. I stepped back into the living room, eyebrows raised. Going somewhere? Mark jumped, guilt flashing across his face before he composed himself. Oh, yeah, emergency at work. I've got to run. On a Saturday afternoon? I couldn't keep the skepticism out of my voice. You know how it is with this new project, he said, not meeting my eyes as he gathered his things. I'll make it up to you, I promise. Before I could respond, he was out the door, leaving me alone in the echoing emptiness of our future home. I sank onto the floor, surrounded by the remnants of my shattered dreams. How had we come to this? When had Mark become a stranger to me? My phone chimed, a message from Rachel popping up on the screen. Just checking in, dear. How's the house coming along? Have you considered my suggestions for the guest suite? I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath to calm the surge of anger. Rachel's suggestions had become more like demands lately, her presence in our lives growing more suffocating by the day. Instead of responding, I scrolled through my contacts and called Sarah. Hey, girl, she answered cheerfully. How's the house hunting going? Sarah, my voice cracked. I think I'm losing my mind. Dana, what's wrong? Her tone immediately shifted to concern. I poured out everything, Mark's distance, Rachel's interference, my growing suspicions. Sarah listened patiently, offering words of support and understanding. You need to confront him, she said finally. This isn't healthy for either of you. I know, I whispered. But what if I'm wrong? What if I'm just being paranoid? And what if you're right? Sarah countered. You deserve the truth, Dana, one way or another. After we hung up, I sat in silence, Sarah's words echoing in my head. She was right. I couldn't go on like this, pretending everything was fine when my world was crumbling around me. With newfound determination, I stood up and began gathering the design samples. If Mark wouldn't be part of building our dream, then I'd do it myself. This house, at least, would be mine. As I worked, a plan began to form in my mind. I'd finish the house, make it perfect. And then, when it was done, I'd confront Mark. I'd demand the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Hours passed as I threw myself into the task, choosing colors, textures, and layouts. It was nearly dark when I heard a car pull up outside. I stepped onto the porch, expecting to see Mark. Instead, I froze as I watched a sleek sports car I didn't recognize park in the driveway. Mark got out of the passenger side, laughing at something the driver said. As the driver's door opened, I caught a glimpse of long blonde hair and a flash of a red dress. My heart stopped as I realized it was Olivia, Mark's boss's daughter. I ducked back inside before they could see me, my mind reeling. This was it, the confirmation of my worst fears. As I heard their voices approaching, I made a split-second decision. I wouldn't confront him. Not yet. First, I needed proof, and then I'd make him regret ever betraying me. With shaking hands, I gathered my things and slipped out the back door, leaving Mark and his colleague to their private tour of our supposed dream home. One thing was certain. This dream had turned into a nightmare, and it was time for me to wake up. The morning of our house handover dawned bright and clear, a mockery of the storm raging inside me. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my dress and plastering on a smile that felt more like a grimace. Today was supposed to be a celebration, the start of our new life together. Instead, it felt like the beginning of the end. Mark was already downstairs, chatting animatedly on the phone. His voice drifted up, carefree and light in a way I hadn't heard in months. My stomach churned. "Ready to go?" he asked as I descended the stairs, ending his call abruptly. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The drive to our new home was silent, tension thick in the air between us. As we pulled up to the house, I saw Rachel's car already parked in the driveway. Of course, she wouldn't miss this. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "There you are," Rachel called out as we approached. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten your own housewarming." I forced a laugh. "How could we forget, Rachel?" "You've only reminded us every day for the past week." She waved her hand dismissively. "Someone had to make sure everything was perfect. Now, come along. The realtor's waiting inside." As we entered the house, I couldn't help but feel a pang of pride. Despite everything, I had poured my heart and soul into making this place beautiful. The soft sage-green walls, the carefully chosen furnishings, it was everything I had dreamed of. The realtor greeted us warmly, papers spread out on the dining room table. "Shall we get started?" Mark nodded, reaching for the pen. But before he could sign, the front door burst open. "Sorry I'm late," a breathless voice called out. I turned, my blood running cold as I saw Olivia, Mark's boss's daughter, striding into our home like she belonged there. "Olivia," I managed to choke out. "What are you doing here?" Mark stepped forward, his face a mask of guilt and determination. "Dana, we need to talk." The room spun around me as Mark launched into a speech I could barely comprehend. Words like affair, divorce, and moving on pierced through the fog of my disbelief. "And Olivia and I, we're in love," Mark finished, his hand now intertwined with hers. I stared at them, my world crumbling around me. "How long?" I whispered. 6 months, Olivia answered, at least having the decency to look uncomfortable. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of building this house, of planning a future that was never going to happen. I turned to Rachel, hoping against hope to see shock or disappointment on her face. Instead, I saw only smug satisfaction. "You knew," I accused, my voice breaking. "You both knew, and you let me go through with all of this anyway." Rachel shrugged. "It's for the best, dear. Mark needs someone who can give him a family, a real future. And let's face it, you were never quite up to the task, were you?" Her words hit me like a physical blow. All the years of subtle jabs of undermining my confidence, it all led to this moment. I looked around the room. At Mark and Olivia's joined hands, at Rachel's triumphant smirk, at the realtor's uncomfortable shifting, and something inside me snapped. Without a word, I turned and walked out of the house. I could hear Mark calling after me, but I didn't stop. I got in my car and drove with no destination in mind, just the overwhelming need to get away. Hours later, I found myself parked outside Sarah's house, tears streaming down my face. As I reached for my phone to call her, a notification popped up, a reminder for an important client meeting tomorrow. In that moment, staring at the reminder of my successful career, the life I had built for myself, I made a decision. I wouldn't let them break me. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. No, I would rise from this stronger than ever, and I would make them regret the day they ever thought they could discard me so easily. With shaking hands, I dialed Sarah's number. When she answered, my voice was steel. "Sarah? I need your help. It's time to plan my comeback." The weeks following Mark's betrayal blurred together in a haze of grief and anger. I threw myself into work, taking on more clients than ever before. If I kept moving, kept planning, kept creating perfect moments for others, maybe I could forget the wreckage of my own life. Sarah was my rock through it all. She let me crash on her couch, held me when the tears came, and pushed me to keep going when all I wanted was to give up. "You're Dana freaking Wilson," she'd say, her eyes fierce with loyalty. "You've built an empire from nothing. You're not going to let those snakes take that away from you." She was right, of course. I had worked too hard, come too far to let Mark and his mother destroy me. But the pain, the humiliation of it all, still burned. One morning as I sipped my coffee and scrolled through emails, a message from my lawyer caught my eye. The subject line read, "Urgent, house ownership update." My heart raced as I opened it. According to the email, there was a discrepancy in the house paperwork. Due to a clerical error, the loan was solely in Mark's name. A plan began to form in my mind, a way to turn this nightmare into an opportunity for justice. I called my lawyer immediately. "Is there any way to keep this quiet for now?" I asked, my mind whirling with possibilities. "For a short time, yes," he replied, "but we'll need to address it eventually." "That's all I need," I said, a grim smile spreading across my face. Over the next few days, I threw myself into research, poring over financial documents and legal statutes. Sarah watched me with a mix of concern and admiration. "Are you sure about this, Dana?" she asked one night as I hunched over my laptop. "It's a big risk." I looked up at her, my eyes burning with determination. "They took everything from me, Sarah. My home, my future, my dignity. It's time I took something back." As my plan took shape, I felt a surge of energy I hadn't experienced in weeks. I was no longer a victim. I was a woman on a mission. The final piece fell into place when I landed a high-profile client, a wealthy tech mogul planning an extravagant product launch. The event would be my biggest yet, a chance to cement my reputation as the top event planner in the city. But more importantly, it was the perfect cover for my true intentions. I reached out to Mark, my voice honey-sweet as I suggested a meeting to discuss the divorce proceedings. He agreed readily, probably eager to be rid of me and start his new life with Olivia. The night before our meeting, I stood in front of the mirror in Sarah's guest room, steeling myself for what was to come. The woman staring back at me was not the broken shell I had been weeks ago. She was fierce, determined, unstoppable. "You can do this," I whispered to my reflection. "You're stronger than they know." As I turned away from the mirror, my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Looking forward to finalizing everything tomorrow. I hope you're prepared to be reasonable." I felt a flash of white-hot anger. Reasonable? After everything they'd done? No, reasonable was the last thing I planned to be. They had no idea what was coming. I replied with a simple, "See you tomorrow," my fingers shaking slightly as I typed. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, I would take back control of my life and make Mark, Olivia, and Rachel pay for their betrayal. As I climbed into bed, my mind raced with the details of my plan. There was so much that could go wrong, so many ways it could backfire. But I pushed the doubts aside. I had to succeed. Failure wasn't an option. Because if this didn't work, if I couldn't pull off this final desperate gambit, I would truly lose everything. And that was a reality I wasn't prepared to face. My heart pounded as I walked into the lawyer's office, my heels clicking against the polished floor. Mark was already there, looking smug in his expensive suit. Rachel sat beside him, her hawk-like eyes following my every move. "Dana, dear," Rachel cooed, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "So good of you to join us. Let's get this over with. Shall we? I smiled tightly, taking my seat across from them. Of course, Rachel. I'm eager to move forward. Our lawyer, Mr. Thompson, cleared his throat. Now, we're here to finalize the divorce proceedings and discuss the division of assets. Dana, I understand you've prepared some documents? I nodded, pulling out a folder. Yes, I have. Given the circumstances of our separation, I believe I've been more than fair in my proposals. Mark leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. What do you mean, fair? You're not entitled to anything more than we've already discussed. I met his gaze steadily. Oh, I think you'll find that I am, Mark. You see, there's been a rather interesting development regarding our house. Rachel's hand shot out, gripping Mark's arm. What are you talking about? With deliberate slowness, I pulled out the paperwork my lawyer had sent me. It seems there was a clerical error when we purchased the house. The loan is solely in Mark's name. The color drained from Mark's face as realization dawned. Rachel's grip on his arm tightened, her knuckles turning white. That's impossible, Mark sputtered. We bought it together. Mr. Thompson examined the documents, his brow furrowed. I'm afraid Miss Wilson is correct. Legally, the house belongs to Mr. Wilson alone. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. Which means, Mark, that you're solely responsible for the mortgage. A mortgage, I might add, that's significantly higher than what you can afford on your own. Rachel's eyes flashed with anger. You conniving little... Mother, Mark cut her off, his voice strained. Let me handle this. He turned to me, desperation creeping into his tone. Dana, be reasonable. We can work something out. I raised an eyebrow. Reasonable? Like you were when you betrayed our marriage? Like Rachel was when she manipulated her way into our lives? Now see here, Rachel started, but I held up a hand, silencing her. I'm not finished. I've prepared new divorce terms. You keep the house, Mark, and all the financial burden that comes with it. In exchange, I get a larger portion of our other assets. Mark's jaw clenched. And if I refuse, I smiled coldly, then I'll be forced to go public with some rather interesting information about your company's financial practices. I'm sure your boss, and Olivia's father, would be very interested to learn about those offshore accounts. The room fell silent. I could almost hear the gears turning in Mark's head as he weighed his options. Finally, he reached for the pen. Where do I sign? As Mark scrawled his signature across the papers, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It was done. I had won. But as I stood to leave, Rachel's voice stopped me cold. You think this is over, she hissed. You have no idea what you've started, you ungrateful little. That's enough, Mother, Mark snapped, looking defeated. I turned to face them one last time. No, Rachel. This is exactly what I've finished. Goodbye, Mark. I hope you and Olivia are very happy together. With that, I walked out of the office, my head held high. As the door closed behind me, I heard Rachel's muffled scream of frustration, followed by the sound of something shattering against the wall. I made it to my car before the tears came. Not tears of sadness or defeat, but of relief and triumph. I had done it. I had taken back control of my life. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. How did it go? I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. It's done, I replied. Time to celebrate. Meet me at our spot in an hour. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face whatever came next. I had survived the worst betrayal of my life, and I had come out stronger. Now it was time to build a new future, one that was entirely my own. 1 year after my divorce from Mark, I stood at the podium accepting the Entrepreneur of the Year award. The ballroom was filled with the city's elite, all eyes on me as I gripped the crystal trophy. Thank you all, I began, my voice steady. A year ago, I thought my life was over. I'd lost my husband, my home, and my sense of self. But standing here today, I realized that was just the beginning. As I spoke, I caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. Mark, looking older and worn, sat at a table near the back. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I saw a flicker of regret cross his face. I continued, my voice growing stronger. We all face betrayals in life. It's how we rise from them that defines us. This award isn't just for me. It's for every woman who's ever been told she's not enough, who's been betrayed or underestimated. The applause was thunderous as I stepped down from the stage. Sarah was there, enveloping me in a tight hug. You did it, girl, she whispered. You showed them all. As the night wore on, I mingled with guests, accepting congratulations and fielding business proposals. My company had grown exponentially over the past year, becoming the go-to for high-profile events across the country. "Impressive speech," a deep voice said behind me. I turned to find James Carter, owner of our biggest competitor, smiling at me. "You've come a long way, Dana." I felt a flutter in my stomach that had nothing to do with nerves. James and I had been dancing around each other for months, our competitive spirit slowly evolving into something more. "Thank you, James," I replied, returning his smile. "Care to dance?" As we swayed on the dance floor, I caught sight of Mark again. He was alone, nursing a drink at the bar. For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. Then I remembered Rachel's smug face, Olivia's hand in Mark's, the betrayal that had shattered my world. "Everything okay?" James asked, noticing my distraction. I looked up at him, really seeing him for the first time. Kind eyes, a warm smile, and not a hint of deceit. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "Everything's perfect." Later that night, as I unlocked the door to my new penthouse apartment, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The place was all mine, decorated exactly as I wanted, with no compromises and no overbearing mother-in-law to appease. I kicked off my heels and poured myself a glass of champagne, walking out onto the balcony. The city lights twinkled below, full of promise and possibility. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "You were amazing tonight. Brunch tomorrow to celebrate?" I smiled, typing back a quick, "Absolutely." Then, on impulse, I scrolled through my contacts until I found James' number. My finger hovered over it for a moment before I pressed call. As the phone rang, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The pain, the betrayal, the moments of doubt, but also the strength I'd found, the friendships I'd deepened, and the woman I'd become. "Hello?" James's voice came through, warm and inviting. "Hi, James," I said, feeling a spark of excitement. "I was wondering if you'd like to join Sarah and me for brunch tomorrow?" As I listened to his enthusiastic acceptance, I realized something profound. The revenge I'd sought against Mark and Rachel, the justice I'd craved. It wasn't in the legal maneuvering or the financial victory. It was in this moment, standing here successful, respected, and open to new love. I'd not only survived their betrayal, I'd thrived because of it. And that was the sweetest revenge of all. As I ended the call with James, I raised my glass to the city skyline. "Here's to new beginnings," I toasted aloud, "and to the strength we find when we're pushed to our limits." The future stretched out before me, bright and full of possibility. Whatever came next, I knew I was ready to face it, stronger, wiser, and finally truly free.